Now,
Good morning. Welcome to this virtual conference, Settlement on the San Juan, Pioneers, Personalities, and Persistence, hosted by the BYU Red Center for Western Studies and the Hole in the Rock Foundation. My name is Gerald Lund, and it is my privilege to welcome you and to be part of this conference. In my early years as a seminary teacher, I fell in love with church history and decided to write a novel called The Work and the Glory. It actually turned out to be 9 novels. By the time I finished that some years later, I was working in the headquarters of the church educational system, and we sponsored tours for our teachers to what we called gospel study tours to Israel and church history and the Wyoming trails. One day in January, we were out on the Wyoming trails at Martin Cove, preparing for that summer. It turned out to be a beautiful, bright summer day, but the temperature was 5 degrees and there was a 30-mile-an-hour wind. I had come prepared because I knew Wyoming, but I thought I was going to die. I mean, I had on thermal underwear, 2 pairs of pants, sweaters, all kinds of stuff. And I was just shivering so bad I could hardly speak. And as I thought about that, I thought about these pioneers who came with hardly anything, not any food. I mean, they're in terrible shape. And it hit me. I'd always thought of the story of that pioneer experience as being the suffering. But the incredible thing that hit me that day was the real story is how many survived it and how they did that. And that day, a thought came to me and said, I want to write this story. And I hadn't thought about doing any more church history. Well, sometime later, I had another experience. One of our seminary teachers, LeGrand Black from Blanding down in southern Utah, called me one day and he knew about the various tours. And he said, I think we have another tour that will equal anything you're doing. And he told me about what he called the Hole in the Rock Pioneers. And I'm a little chagrined to say this, but I said, you mean Butch Cassidy? Why would we want to go down there and study about Butch Cassidy? And he reminded me that it's the hole in the rock, not the hole in the wall that we associate. But I share that because I have found so many people that don't know about these pioneers. And so a group of us went down and LeGrand and others took us across the trail, and it was an incredible experience. There were no weather challenges. We went in the fall, it was beautiful weather, but we took Jeeps and ATVs across most of the trail, and it was unbelievable. And the stories that they told were unbelievable. And when we got to Lake Canyon and looking over where that incredibly miraculous lake was out there in the middle of nowhere and really became a powerful incentive for the saints to go on, I had that same experience. I thought, I want to tell this story too. It needs to be told. And out of that came The Undaunted, which we subtitled The Miracle of the Hole in the Rock Pioneers. I debated on what I wanted to use for a title, but I called it The Undaunted because when I looked it up in the Webster Dictionary, undaunted means characterized by courage and tenacity, unwilling to abandon one's purpose, undiminished in valor and determination. And I read those and I thought, that's the perfect description of these people. Eventually, sometime later, I decided to continue the story. And that is, the story didn't end when they got to the San Juan. They now had to settle the place and make a living and bring others. And so eventually I added 2 more novels that focused on that settlement of the San Juan area with the same kind of amazing stories. The first was called Only the Brave, and the second, To Soar with the Eagles. And this is what this conference is about, to come to better know these pioneers and what they did and the legacy that we have here in Utah that I think is being improved, and especially with conferences like this. I'm so happy to see this happening. So I thought what I'd do now is just briefly go through the backstory and emphasize some of the things that made this so important to me. The story actually begins around 1877 and 1878, when there was a truly, and this is not an exaggerated term, there was truly a real existential threat to the state of Utah, or the territory of Utah at that point. It started with 4 young Navajo braves who came up into central Utah to trade with the Mormons. On their way back, they got caught in a blizzard. They holed up in a cowboy's line cabin. There were a couple of cows nearby under the shelter of the trees. So they took one of the calves, knowing that the Mormons would feed the Indians and they would pay them later. Unfortunately, it was not a Mormon ranch. And the cowboys came in and found them and opened fire on them. 3 of the boys were killed. 1 was badly wounded, but incredibly, he got away and made his way all the way back down to the Navajo Nation. Unfortunately, he was the son of the chief of the Navajo. So there was outrage when they heard this story, and they thought it was the Mormons. And it looked like the whole southern part of Utah would go up in war. So President John Taylor at that point realized that something had to be done and it had to be permanent. And so he decided to set up a mission. He called it the San Juan Mission. And in December of 1878, at the Parowan Stake Conference, Elder Erastus Snow came and issued the calls for this mission. It was a unique call in some ways because he said that you don't have to feel obligated to go, and no one will look down on you if you don't. But he then said that what we're after is a permanent settlement, not just a mission where you come and go back. Ironically, the church leaders at that time used 3 metaphors to say why this was so important. The first, they said, you are to be a buffer between the Indians and the lawless. Second, you will be a shock absorber, like shock absorbers on a wagon. You'll cushion the blows and soften them. And finally, you're to be like a lightning rod that calls the warring factions down on yourselves. As I read those, I thought, how's that for a motivational pep talk? This is what we're calling you to. But nevertheless, they answered. Eventually, about 250 people went. And astoundingly, 25% of those were children aged 6 and under. So I would like to read something from the preface I wrote to the Andana, because this kind of sums up who these people are and what they did. This is a true story. It is a true story of real people who undertook and completed what many called an impossible journey. It is a story of a group of Mormon pioneers. Unlike earlier pioneers, they were not fleeing persecution or seeking a place where they would have freedom of religion. They were not escaping poverty or trying to join others of their own faith. These pioneers lived in prosperous Mormon communities in comfortable homes. They ran successful businesses or farmed land, which was much more productive and rich than anything they would find where they were going. They went because they were called and because they believed that call was from the Lord. They went because they believed it was necessary for the safety and good of the overall community. In short, they went because they believed it was the right thing to do. We're looking at pictures now of the area that they went through when they finally decided on a route. Here's kind of a summary of their story. They planned on being gone for 6 weeks before they arrived in their destination. Instead, it took them 6 months. And that was just getting there. Once they were there were no homes, no other people except for a couple of families. It was limited arable land, poor soil, annual floods, hostile Indians, drunken cowboys, and no settlements to buy things within 100 miles. And yet they went, and more incredibly, most of them stayed. At the same time that this challenge was going on, the thing that made this story so incredible for me is the feats of courage that you come across all through the journals and the history. The stunning examples of their sheer endurance, road building through 200 miles of land where some said you couldn't even get a burro through it. Numerous incidents of sacrifices, literally dozens of miraculous interventions. This spirit and courage was summed up by 2 simple statements by Jens Nielsen. Jens Nielsen was the oldest man in the company. He was in his 60s when he left. He'd already been crippled by frostbite in the handcart companies. When it was determined that there was no way through and no way to go back, after a great debate, Jens Nielsen spoke to the company and he said this: "We must go through, whether we can or not." Now, I'm sure some of the people thought, what did he just say? Let me read it again. "We must go through whether we can or not." And then he said, and this has become famous in the people who were there, "All we need is more stickatitude." He was from Denmark and he spoke with a heavy Danish accent. What he was trying to say was stick-to-itiveness, but it came out as stickatitude. And after he spoke, the president of the company called for a vote, and without a dissenting vote, the company voted to move on and go on to the San Juan. That's the legacy of these wonderful, marvelous people. They went because they were called. One day, some years ago, I was doing a fireside. I talked about the pioneers. And at the end, I had a thought come to me and I said, just for curiosity, how many of you here are from San Juan pioneer stock? Now, there were about 200 or 300 people there. I was astonished when almost half of them raised their hands. And then I asked them, how many of them had been told as children to have more stickity-tooty, like Jens Nielsen said? And again, the majority raised their hand. And then, and this made me laugh out loud, one woman called out, "And my kids still hear it almost every day from us." In these trying times, brothers and sisters, we live in a time where so many wonderful things are happening, but we're going through a time of great tribulation and concern with COVID and all the other things going on. And that's one of the things I love about these people. You want to talk about people having a hard time and sticking to it? I love this quote by Gordon B. Hinckley. He said, "It is good for us to look to the past, to gain appreciation for the present and perspective for the future. It is good to look upon the virtues of those who have gone before, to gain strength for whatever lies ahead. It is good to reflect upon the work of those who labored so hard and gained so little in this world, but out of whose dreams and early plans so well nurtured has come a great harvest of which we are the beneficiaries. Their tremendous example can become a compelling motivation for us all. I think that's the point of this whole conference. This tremendous example, their tremendous example can become a compelling motivation for us all. For each of us is a pioneer in his own life, often in his own family, and many of us pioneer daily in trying to establish a gospel foothold in distant parts of the world. Thank you. It's my privilege to be part of this, to speak with you and to say my hallelujahs and amens to this wonderful effort to let us learn more about the San Juan pioneers and their mission. Thank you.